Good morning again. I'm honored and delighted to welcome Mr. Omar Abdullah, the former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir and the working president of the Jammu and Kashmir National Conference to the Hindu Lit for Life 2016 as the keynote speaker of this festival. We are very grateful indeed that he has made time in the middle of so many pressing and urgent matters, as we know, in his home state, to come here and address this audience. Mr. Abdullah, the scion of a distinguished political family, is a staunch advocate of transparency, accountability, and responsibility in governance. He was one of the youngest politicians to be appointed a minister in the Government of India and held ministerial portfolios at the center as a Minister of State in the Union Ministry of Commerce and Industries, and later in the Ministry of External Affairs. Nobody can forget Mr. Abdullah's eloquent and impassioned speech in the House as a young member of Parliament, a speech and points of which are as relevant today as it was then, as we continue to live in an extremely divisive society. During the debate on the civil nuclear deal with the US, he declared, "I am a Muslim and I am an Indian. I see no distinction between the two. I see no reason why, as a Muslim, I have to fear a deal between the United States of America and India." And he continued to say, "The enemies of the Indian Muslims are not the Americans, and the enemies of the Indian Muslims are not deals like this. The enemies of the Indian Muslims are the same enemies that all the poor people of India face: poverty and hunger, unemployment, lack of development, and the absence of a voice. It is that we are against, the effort being made to crush our voice." It's no surprise, then, that this was his focus during his stewardship of the state. During his term as Chief Minister, and he was the youngest person to hold such office in his state, Mr. Abdullah put development at the top of his agenda. He pioneered and helped establish important institutions like the State Information Commission, the State Accountability Commission, the State Vigilance Commission, and a grievance redressal cell, something which is very hard to see in many other parts of India. He was also instrumental in enacting the Public Services Guarantee Act and the Right to Information Act, and established Panchayati Raj institutions in his state. In terms of governance and administration, Mr. Abdullah's various initiatives during his tenure as Chief Minister saw a great measure of success. For example, the Employment and Welfare Program for the youth, to encourage educated youth to be self-employed and indeed expand the employment orbit for their unemployment, was highly lauded. In addition, Mr. Abdullah's administration focused on upgrading the region's infrastructure by building roads, bridges, and by improving road connectivity to far-flung and difficult terrain. Other significant inputs included the building of water treatment plants, providing protected water supply for schools, more than 5,000 schools, if I may add, including many of them in remote areas. Although his time in office was often suffused with challenges, Mr. Abdullah has been undeterred in his determination to bring hope and development during his tenure as Chief Minister. We are really very grateful that he could come here today. Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullah, and we welcome you onto the stage and to make your address.
Well, a very good morning to all of you, and a very happy Pongal to all of you as well. I must begin by confessing that I have hitherto steadfast avoided participating in lit fests, because I always feel like a bit of an imposter when I come here, because I'm neither a writer nor an author. I am very far removed from my first book, even though I've had a couple of people asking whether I'd be interested in writing. And I've always believed that I don't really have anything interesting to say that would interest a publisher. And to find myself in a gathering as august as a lit fest like the Hindu Lit for Life puts together, puts me at a distinct disadvantage of being in an absolute minority, of never having been published. And therefore, it's actually rather a unique experience for me to be amongst all of you this morning, but one that I have greatly looked forward to, even though at various points I was actually worried that I wouldn't make it here at all. About 2 weeks ago, I shot off an email to the organizers saying, look, the state of affairs in J&K is extremely uncertain at the moment, and I must warn you that there is every likelihood that something may develop in the last couple of days before your festival, and I may have to drop out. In case I do, please understand. They were extremely understanding and immediately wrote back saying, yes, of course, we would understand. We'll look forward to seeing you, but in case you don't manage, we will understand. And I'm extremely grateful for that understanding. I'm also grateful that I've actually finally managed to make it here to Chennai. It's not very often that I'm able to straddle the distance from the extreme north to the extreme south, but given the let's say, similarities between what I and my state went through during the last few months of my tenure and what Chennai went through not even a couple of months ago, I felt even more a sense of responsibility that I should come here and participate in the re-emergence, so to speak, of Chennai from the devastating floods, because I know that if a similar event had been organized in Srinagar in the aftermath of the devastating floods there, and some of you had made the effort to travel from down south all the way up north, I would have been, and the state would have been extremely grateful as well. So, be that as it may, I've been asked to talk about my Kashmir. And in a sense, it's actually depressing for all of us in the state of Jammu and Kashmir that 25 years of militancy later, we are still talking about my Kashmir from the prism of Kashmir's problems. Of course, the problems of Kashmir stem from much further in time than just the last 25 years. But really, the focus of Kashmir's trouble and problems started from the onset of militancy in the late 80s and in 1990. So for a resident of Jammu and Kashmir, for a resident of Srinagar, if you were to have told me in the early 90s that in 2016 I would be addressing an audience in Chennai and still talking about the problems of Jammu and Kashmir from the prism of the trouble and the militancy, I don't think I would have been able to take that. The fact that we've lived through 25 years of turmoil has been extremely difficult for us, but I'll come to that period later because I want to put it into some sort of context as to why we are where we are, and then the gaps that I leave and the areas that I omit either deliberately or by mistake, I'll leave open to questions, and I'll take as many questions as I can. We start with the accession of Jammu and Kashmir, and that in itself was unique in the Indian context. In August of 1947, when the princely states were asked to choose between India and Pakistan, 3 states gave India trouble at that time: the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the state of Hyderabad, and the state of Junagadh, for similar but also different reasons. In the case of 2 states, Hyderabad and Junagadh, they were Hindu-majority states ruled by a Muslim ruler. In the case of Jammu and Kashmir, it was a Muslim-majority state ruled by a Hindu ruler. And when they were asked to choose, 2 states opted to go with Pakistan. 1 state didn't make up its mind or didn't decide one way or the other and asked both countries to stand still and give it time to decide. Hyderabad and Junagadh at that point in time had opted to go with Pakistan. Of course, that was, it was unfeasible, and certain developments took place, which obviously meant that Hyderabad and Junagadh merged into India. Jammu and Kashmir did not make up its mind. The Maharaja said, I need time, give me time, and both countries agreed that they would stand where they were, give the Maharaja time to make up his mind, and go forward from there. Of course, India stood by what it had said. Pakistan chose not to. Jammu and Kashmir was invaded. Large parts of Jammu and Kashmir were occupied by tribal raiders, regular Pakistani army, etc., upon which the Maharaja appealed to India and said, look, I need help, come and help. India rightly said, look, we can't come to the assistance of an independent nation. If Jammu and Kashmir were to be a part of India, we would be able to help. The Maharaja signed an instrument of accession. Indian forces arrived, pushed back the Pakistani raiders to a certain point, at which point the lines were drawn. And then the instrument of accession between the state and the union was arrived at, and Jammu and Kashmir became a part of India. Herein again, there are differences between how the rest of the states acceded to India and how Jammu and Kashmir did. And this is, I think, important in the current context because we're often asked, why does Jammu and Kashmir feel it's different? Why should Jammu and Kashmir feel it should be treated differently? Well, simply because the way in which we became a part of the Union of India was different to any other state. While other states acceded and then merged into the Union of India entirely, Jammu and Kashmir acceded, but then retained its own distinct identity within the overall Indian Union. Jammu and Kashmir was the only state that in its negotiations with India for accession maintained its own identity with a distinct flag and also with its own constitution. And this is enshrined in the Indian Constitution and protected under Article 370. Now, I'll come to that in a bit, because there's a lot of confusion about what Article 370 means and what Article 370 implies for the rest of the country vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir. But there is also the other dimension, and I touched upon that briefly, which was the invasion of the Pakistani raiders into Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this was a matter that was taken by the then government of India to the United Nations. And the United Nations was asked to resolve this matter. A plebiscite was promised, and that plebiscite was mentioned in Security Council resolutions. Now again, more often than not, we're on the receiving end of a whole lot of propaganda from the part of Pakistan as to why these United Nations Security Council resolutions were not implemented. Why did India deny the people of Jammu and Kashmir the right to self-determination, as was enshrined in these Security Council resolutions, which were arrived at by India approaching the United Nations, not Pakistan? Well, the simple answer to this is that the conditions that were laid down in these United Nations Security Council resolutions were not implemented first by Pakistan and then by India. You know, I often ask myself, and I haven't really got a reasonable answer to this question, why is it that we are so apologetic on this one issue, that we don't take the fight to Pakistan on the refusal or the denial of the right to self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir? Because if you read the United Nations Security Council resolution, it is very clear. The first condition laid down by the United Nations Security Council is that Pakistan will withdraw its troops and its people from the territories of Jammu and Kashmir back to its own boundaries. Subsequent to Pakistan withdrawing, India will scale down its presence to a level that will allow it to conduct a plebiscite in keeping with the plebiscite commission that was to be set up by the United Nations. Now we know for a fact that the first condition was never implemented. So how can it be the responsibility of India to carry out the plebiscite? The fact of the matter is that Pakistan did not withdraw the people that invaded. And therefore, if part one is not done, obviously part two will not follow. Yet for some reason, Pakistan has conveniently drawn a shield over what it didn't do and continuously blames India for the absence of any forward movement on this. The truth is that if Pakistan had fulfilled condition A, who's to say that condition B would not have been fulfilled by India, and then we wouldn't have gone forward from there? But A wasn't done, B didn't follow, and today we are where we are. And as one of the former United Nations Secretary Generals has said, so much water has flown under the bridge now that it is almost inconceivable to imagine that those resolutions could be carried out today. In addition, we don't give India enough credit for having protected the territorial boundaries of Jammu and Kashmir the way it has done, as opposed to our neighbor Pakistan. Let's assume even for a moment that today, suddenly good sense were to prevail on our neighbors across. The government of India would hypothetically say, okay, fine, let's carry out these resolutions. What happens to the territorial boundaries of Jammu and Kashmir? India has ensured that not 1 inch of territory has moved left or right. The state of Jammu and Kashmir, as it existed at the point of accession, is what it is today. Pakistan hasn't done the same. Even today, you have an argument in Pakistan about Gilgit and Baltistan, as whether Gilgit and Baltistan should be removed from what was erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir and merged into Pakistan. The tribal areas, Aksai Chin, which was very conveniently gifted by the Pakistanis to the Chinese, is actually part of the territory of Jammu and Kashmir as held by the Maharaja on the night of 14th, 15th August 1947. So there are a whole host of questions that come to mind when you start looking at the United Nations Security Council resolution, which Pakistan is unable to answer. And for some reason, we have chosen not to ask. But all we can do is keep talking about this and hoping that somewhere down the line we become less apologetic about our historic handling of this particular issue, which Pakistan has always used to target us, particularly in international fora. Now, when we come to Jammu and Kashmir's accession, I mentioned to you that unlike other states, Jammu and Kashmir acceded on the basis of certain conditions. Now, other states were free to negotiate their own terms. They chose not to. Jammu and Kashmir, for reasons best known to the leadership at that time, actually decided to maintain a distinct identity. As I said, we have our own flag, we have our own constitution. The Union of India at the point of accession was actually only responsible for 4 items: currency, communication, defense, and foreign affairs. Everything else was the domain of the state, which means if you extend it to its logical conclusion, the Supreme Court of India, the Election Commission of India, the Controller and Auditor General of India, the Indian Administrative Services, the IPS, all these other services would have no jurisdiction over the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, accepting that enough water has flown under the bridge, you can't reverse the clock right back to the point at which only these 4 items were the control of the government of India. I believe there is scope for some amount of give and take so that the distinct identity of Jammu and Kashmir is protected, but at the same time, these institutions that I believe serve a valuable purpose are able to continue their oversight over the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Article 370, one hears a lot about, particularly in the political context. You will hear cries for the abrogation of Article 370, for Article 370 to be removed, without any understanding of what Article 370 means. I have no doubt that if I was to conduct a straw poll here and ask members of the audience why they believe that they are unable to buy property in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, most, if not all of you, will say it's because of Article 370. But the truth of the matter is that Article 370 has nothing to do with your inability to buy property in Jammu and Kashmir. Article 370 is simply the provision of the Indian Constitution that ratified the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to the rest of the country and gave it its constitutional status. Similar provisions, articles in the Constitution, 371A, etc., apply to other states as well. They apply to the state of Himachal Pradesh, they apply to the state of Arunachal Pradesh, they apply to the state of Nagaland, and they apply to states like Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But nobody talks about these provisions of the Constitution because they don't have state subject laws similar to the state subject laws of Jammu and Kashmir. And the state subject laws are not a creation of accession. In fact, the state subject laws of Jammu and Kashmir predate accession. The state subject laws that prohibit people from the rest of the country buying property in Jammu and Kashmir actually came into existence in 1927 and 1932. They were the products of the then Maharaja, who introduced these laws because the people of Jammu were worried that rich Punjabis would move in and buy up large parts of their lands. And that worried them. And therefore, they made an appeal to the Maharaja, and in order to protect the interests of the people of Jammu, these state subject laws were introduced, and they continue up until today. And therefore, this whole propaganda that is waged, particularly by one political party that is ruling the center at the moment, that you remove Article 370 and all Jammu and Kashmir's problems will mysteriously disappear, is absolute rubbish. I've even heard one well-known Bollywood actor suggesting that if you remove Article 370, the Kashmiri Pandits will come back. The Kashmiri Pandits did not leave Jammu and Kashmir because of Article 370. They left Jammu and Kashmir because they felt unsafe there. Kashmiri Pandits lived in Jammu and Kashmir until 1990. Some of them continue to live even now, even with Article 370 in place. They live in Jammu in large numbers now, even with Article 370. So it's not as if Article 370 is a barrier to them coming back. They are state subjects. So this propaganda around Article 370 is misplaced. But it is tom-tommed around election time. People are misinformed about it, and therefore people take a position on Article 370. I can't tell you how many people have taken positions against Article 370 on Twitter when I've got into a small back and forth with them, and I've asked them, well, what is it about 370 you want to remove? Well, we want to buy property in Jammu and Kashmir. I said, well, even if you remove 370, my state subject laws will still remain. What will happen is if you remove Article 370, Jammu and Kashmir will no longer remain a part of this country because there will be no constitutional link between us. So how will you buy property anyway? So as I'm saying, this sort of misinformation is what I find events like this very beneficial for, because it allows me to correct this deliberate sort of injection of misinformation that happens. Now, over the years, various acts of omission and commission, we have mishandled Jammu and Kashmir to the point where in 1990 you had the emergence of an insurgency. Now, unlike other states where you have a problem with Naxalism, the roots of Jammu and Kashmir's problems are not economic. Jammu and Kashmir was never a poor state. Because of the land reforms that were carried out in the late 1940s, landowners were converted into, tenant farmers were converted into landowners with no compensation at all required. Debt was written off. And therefore, the levels of poverty in Jammu and Kashmir, even today after 25 years of militancy, are the lowest in the country. And so Jammu and Kashmir's problem is not an economic problem, and therefore will not be solved with economic packages. Yes, there is an element of unemployment that adds to the problem. Yes, there is a need to bring the state at par with other parts of the country in terms of economic development. But the roots of the problem in Jammu and Kashmir lie in its politics. It lies in how the center and the state have dealt with each other. It starts from the arrest of the then Prime Minister, Sheikh Abdullah, in 1953 by a constable of J&K police, where he was arrested at the direction of Government of India and put away. It starts from 1953, and you can trace events as you go along, whether it is the 1977 breakup of the understanding between the Congress and the National Conference, the 1984 dismissal of the Farooq Abdullah government, the 87 problem with the elections that took place then, the imposition of governor's rule in 1990. There are various sort of milestones along the way which added to the political alienation, which ultimately manifested itself in levels of violence and militancy that you have seen. But over the years, particularly over the last 10 odd years, the situation in Jammu and Kashmir has improved. It hasn't normalized to the extent that we would like it to, but levels of violence are at a historic low. That hasn't made the uncertainty any less. You know, it's amazing how events like this are put together. Subjects like this are given, and it turns out to be very timely. I could have been standing here with Jammu and Kashmir far removed from the headlines, I'm anyway not sure how much Jammu and Kashmir features in the headlines this far south of the Vindhyas, but I'll assume once in a while it does find mention. But otherwise, I mean, further up north, you will find a lot of focus on Jammu and Kashmir, both because of the internal and the external uncertainties. Internally, you see the situation today, we have no government, so to speak. There is uncertainty about whether the coalition will come together again and give the people an elected government. That is one part of the uncertainty. On the external front, up until yesterday, we didn't know if the two foreign secretaries of India and Pakistan were going to meet. It was okay. It was similar to the whole NSA sort of thing. Well, you call it off. No, you call it off. Well, come on, one of you call it off. And we're all waiting to see who's going to call it off. But neither wanted to call it off. But both wanted it called off. And it was yeah, that's what it was. ultimately, it seemed as if Pakistan finally decided, okay, fine, look, you're not going to do it, we'll do it. So they didn't exactly call it off, but they said, well, we'll reschedule dates at mutual convenience. But clearly, they weren't in a mood to talk now. And rightly so, because in the shadow of Pathankot, to expect a normal dialogue to take place between the two countries would perhaps have been to expect too much. And therefore, the two NSAs, if they meet, if they sort of address some of the issues with regard to terrorism, with regard to the Pathankot attack, etc., ordinary discussions and routine sort of interactions can resume at a later date. But at least I'm reassured by the fact that we haven't stopped talking to each other, because that's traditionally been our method. We get attacked, we stop talking to each other, we set conditions, those conditions are never met, but yet we end up talking to each other again. And this has happened time and again. So I'm not surprised that now when we set conditions, nobody listens to them, because I was in the government of India when Parliament was attacked. And I distinctly remember at that time when we broke all contact with Pakistan, we actually put together teams of ministers to go out to important capitals around the world and try and explain why we had taken the steps that we had taken, including mobilizing our forces on the border. And I remember at that time we had created a list of 20 people that we wanted Pakistan to hand back to us. I don't think we got a single one of those people back out of that list of 20, and I carried that list of 20 to a couple of capitals as well. And I still remember some of the names on them, and I'm sure they're still where they were right back then. We did the same thing after 26/11 as well. We set certain conditions about detentions, arrests, etc. Not much. And so I think we are obviously a little bit more careful about drawing lines in the sand now after Pathankot, and rightly so. Pakistan is not going to detain Maulana Masood Azhar, other than the token couple of extra police people outside his house to say that he's been, what do they call it? Protective custody. Yeah, I'm not sure who they're protecting him from, but if protective custody is what they want to call it, then so be it. But yes, I think that's the best that we can expect. And therefore, if we start drawing lines like, yes, you have to arrest so-and-so before we talk to you, it's not going to happen. Similar to the line that we drew in the sand with regard to Pakistan meeting the Hurriyat. If we expect Pakistan to say, look, we're not going to meet the Hurriyat conference so that India is happy, it's not going to happen either. And therefore, I think we need to be more reasonable with our responses. And I think that reasonableness we seem to have seen in light of the attack in Pathankot, but it does sort of bring to the forefront the difficulties that one faces in engagement with Pakistan. And I think that's something that has been brought to light for Prime Minister Modi very clearly. You can't treat Pakistan like you do other countries because it is a very uncertain and unstable relationship. Dropping in on Lahore like that was completely out of the box. Let's face it, it was unheard of, unthought of, and completely unexpected. I dare say he'd probably be the only person who could have gotten away with it, because the Congress would never have, the BJP would have never allowed Dr. Manmohan Singh to have done something like this. But be that as it may, he did it. If Pathankot had not happened, his dropping in on Lahore would have been an unqualified success. In the shadow of what happened in Pathankot, of course, questions will be raised and question marks will be placed, but we'll have to see how that one plays out. As of now, it seems to be a bit of tiptoeing around each one's concerns. But as I said earlier, at least we're engaged. Now, what I would like to see going ahead, obviously, is the resumption of a popularly elected government in Jammu and Kashmir. No state should be ruled from the center, and no state should be ruled without an accountable government. For a state like Jammu and Kashmir, this is the second time in a year that we find ourselves in a situation where we are ruled by the governor rather than by an elected government. So I'm hoping that sooner rather than later, the two allies can work out an amicable arrangement and resume governing the state of Jammu and Kashmir. At the same time, I'm hoping that India and Pakistan will be able to address each other's concerns. We will see some concrete action taken on the basis of the intelligence that we have provided with regard to the attack in Pathankot, and therefore some meaningful dialogue with Pakistan will take place. I'm hoping that this dialogue will not be the sort that focuses more on the cameras and sound bites, because that's not what we need. What Jammu and Kashmir and what the rest of the country needs with its engagement with Pakistan is a sustained dialogue at a manageable level, rather than high-profile single one-off events that don't lead to any major developments. I'm also hoping that, similar to Prime Minister Modi's out-of-the-box approach with regard to Pakistan in terms of his dropping into Lahore, will also manifest itself in some sort of out-of-the-box approach to the internal dimension of the problem in Jammu and Kashmir. Because there is a constituency in Jammu and Kashmir that does not recognize accession of the state to the union as final. They look for a solution beyond the four walls of the constitution. Now, sorry, that sign threw me for a moment. Yeah, so I was saying they look for a solution beyond the four walls of the Constitution. But that doesn't mean that we can't engage with them. They have from time to time shown a little less reluctance to be spoken to. They've spoken to the government of India during Atal Bihari Vajpayee Sahab's time. They've spoken to the government of India during Dr. Manmohan Singh Sahab's time. Unfortunately, those dialogues were short-lived and did not produce any meaningful results. But that's not to say that we shouldn't keep trying. So I am hoping that a similar out-of-the-box approach that we saw with regard to Pakistan, we will also see internally in a wider dialogue or a wider discourse between the union and the state. As far as my party is concerned, we've made no bones about where we see the solution. We believe that 1947 is not a question to be reopened. The state of Jammu and Kashmir has acceded to the Union of India. Our only grouse is that the conditions that were enshrined in the Constitution to make that accession possible have gradually been whittled away. So basically what you're saying is that Jammu and Kashmir must continue to uphold its end of the bargain by remaining a part of the Union, but the conditions or the terms that were set for such accession to be possible can gradually be eroded away to nothing, and Jammu and Kashmir should not have any sort of any grouse or any sense of aggrievement over that, which I think is unfair. As I said earlier, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. To expect a situation, to expect clocks to be turned back to a position where you can go back to what it existed between 47 and 53 is perhaps unrealistic. But I also believe that there is enough scope and enough flexibility within the Constitution of India to address to a large extent some of this sense of political alienation that exists on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir, to allow for a meaningful solution. Because, and I'll end with this before I start taking questions, the fact of the matter is that both the dimensions of the Kashmir problem, the internal and the external, will have to be handled simultaneously and will both have to be addressed. You know, at various points in time, we have tried to address either the internal or the external dimension in isolation, and we have failed. So whether it is the talks in Tashkent, whether it is the Simla agreement, whether it is Lahore, whether it is Agra, these were all efforts that were made to address the external dimension of the problem between India and Pakistan while ignoring the internal dimension. And similarly, you've had efforts targeted at resolving the internal dimension of the problem, whether it was the Indira Sheikh Accord that resulted from the Beg Parthasarathi talks in the late 70s, the Rajiv Farooq Accord, similar arrangements. Let's even go as far as the recent Modi Mufti agreement that created the recent state government. These are all efforts to address the internal dimension. Unless we address both dimensions simultaneously, I dare say a few years down the line, we will still be discussing Kashmir, and unfortunately, we will still be discussing Kashmir from the context of problems rather than from the context of peace and the peace dividend that should flow to the state. And I'm hoping, I truly am hoping, that the next, in a few years from now, when somebody comes here and talks about Kashmir, they don't have to talk about the problems of Kashmir. They talk about everything that is good about the state and everything that the state has done to progress and to participate in the progress of mainstream India. So that is it for the opening remarks. I think I have enough time to take a handful of questions. Yeah, so I'll ask you guys to just... Can I ask, how do you want to handle the questions? Do you want to put your hands up and then I'll come to you one by one? Okay, we'll start from this side and I'll work my way across as far as possible. Yeah, please.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I heard that some citizens of India can vote in parliamentary elections, but can't vote, same voter can't participate in state elections and Panchayati Raj elections. Is it not contradictory and curtailing the rights of citizens?
Well, that's because they are not subjects of Jammu and Kashmir. They came from West Pakistan. And therefore, because they are not subjects of Jammu and Kashmir, they are not state subjects, they do not have a vote in the state assembly and in the panchayats and local bodies. That is the way it is. Our votes are for state subjects. I am a citizen of India. I vote in Jammu and Kashmir. I can't come to Tamil Nadu and vote in your elections here unless I become a resident here. Now, these people are residents of West Pakistan. They have not been given state subject rights because they're not born in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And as I said earlier, these state subject laws are not a creation of recent times. They're not a creation of the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India. They predate the accession. And if a uniformity of views is formed in the state of Jammu and Kashmir over state subject laws, by all means, re-examine this. But until such time, this is the condition, this is the situation that prevails, and that's the way it is.
You are one of the most interesting politicians in India, not just for Kashmir, known for your fresh thinking. The question is, personally, how hopeful are you of making a breakthrough along the two tracks that you mentioned, the internal and the external? Are you really hopeful, and what keeps you going, given what looks like an intractable challenge?
Well, first and foremost, when you describe a politician as interesting, it's a little worrisome because I take it from the context of yes minister and yes prime minister. And every time the minister had a proposal that was interesting, it meant anything but I'll take this as a compliment. As far as how hopeful am I, let me put it this way, I'm more hopeful than I am optimistic. Because I have to remain hopeful. If I'm not, then I'll just be despondent. 25 years is a long time to go through living in a place that is wrecked by conflict and bloodshed. And therefore, if I lose hope, then I can't even instill hope in others. I have to first remain hopeful myself and then instill hope in others. But as of now, I don't have as much cause for optimism as I would like. I've seen in the last 16, 18 months, far too much knee-jerk reaction to what happens in Jammu and Kashmir and in the immediate neighborhood than I would have liked to see. I'm hoping that post-Pathankot there has been a slightly different approach. If a little bit more maturity sets into our reactions, and so far there's been unfortunately very little contact between the state and the center other than government to government. If that umbrella gets sort of widened a bit, then yes, I'll have perhaps more cause for optimism than I do right now. Yeah, I'll take one here and then I'll go to the middle.
Sir, after Indira Gandhi helping the formation of Bangladesh, do you think that Pakistan is helping this separatist in Kashmir? It seems after this Bangladesh episode, there is more violence in Kashmir.
Well, I think Pakistan has always treated Jammu and Kashmir as the unfinished agenda of partition. For Pakistan, a Muslim majority state going with India was in complete sort of it was completely opposed to their two-nation theory. As far as they were concerned, Muslims should have gone with Pakistan and the rest should have stayed with India. So for a Muslim majority state to opt to stay with India was something they found very difficult to accept. Of course, we heaped insult on injury when East Pakistan was freed and it became Bangladesh. So yes, I'm sure these two aspects have been part and parcel of what has governed their approach, particularly to Jammu and Kashmir, and they've made no secret about this. I'll come.
Sir, from the south we are unable to understand how the role of the Hurriyat movement in Kashmir, how the leaders, some of the leaders, separatist leaders are freely coming and meeting the Pak Commissioner in Delhi, because we are in the south, we are not a double understanding, a legally constituted state is allowing this movement. Can you throw some light on this?
Well, because I see no reason why you should not allow them. I mean, what difference does it make? I mean, personally, I feel that they get more importance and more relevance when you stop them from meeting than they do when you allow them to meet. Because honestly, my experience has shown me that a meeting between them and a visiting Pakistani leader is perhaps in the middle, small column somewhere hidden away that you can hardly find. But if you detain them before the meeting, or if you stop them from meeting, or if you cancel the dialogue between India and Pakistan because this meeting is going to take place, it's front page banner headlines not only in our country, but other important newspapers pick up on it as well. And therefore, I think as difficult as it may be for some to stomach or palate, it really is the easier option, because it's far less damaging propaganda-wise for them to just have this little meeting, because it doesn't really result in much. Let me just take one. Yeah, the gentleman. Yeah. Okay, I have about 7 minutes more, so let's try and get as many. I'll come across here now. Okay, yeah, okay, I'll take 2 more up there and 1 here, and then we'll see. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Morning, Abdullah sir. So you were just answering that it would actually help us by letting these separatist leaders just be by themselves and do what they want to do. But where do you draw a line to separatism? Do you just let them do what they want to do? Because we see from down south, we see people like Asia Andrabi hoisting Pakistan's flag in Kashmir, and do we just make no bones about it and just...
Oh no, we do make bones about that. She has been detained from time to time until the courts intervene and allow her out on bail or set her free. It's not as if action doesn't follow. In almost all these cases are registered, action follows, people are detained, people are arrested. But sometimes it helps to take the course that may seem a little unpalatable to you. But it is far more the pragmatic one, because, you know, I tend to find that more often than not, they do these things for a reaction. They want you to detain them. They want you to arrest them. They want you to make martyrs and heroes out of them, because that's how they remain relevant amongst the people. You know, the Hurriyat conference is never more relevant than when you are questioning their relevance. I tell you this from experience, because I've now spent enough years in politics to understand this. The more I question the relevance of the Hurriyat, the more relevant they become. And therefore, I'm the first one to say, yes, they are relevant, now prove your relevance.
So does this mean that if she's hoisting Pakistan's flag, we just walk by and clap hands?
Nobody walks away. Nobody walks away when she hoists the flag. Look, again, Srinagar is a very big city. She's not coming into the heart of the town, into Lal Chowk and hoisting the flag. She's in some house, in some room somewhere where nobody knows where the room is. She has 10 people around her. She puts a Pakistani flag, puts it on YouTube. Now, we have no prior information about this. We have no idea where she's doing it. Were she to be doing it in Lal Chowk, I have no doubt that efforts to do that would be foiled. But you can't stop everything. But that doesn't mean that action doesn't follow after. Let's take 2 from up there. Yeah, there's a gentleman already near the mic. Please.
You said that one of main prerequisite for the plebiscite is Pakistan withdrawing troops, giving up the territory from Kashmir. For no reason we are asking. But nowhere, Pakistan, we have asked, or Pakistan also has access to that, and they have been harping on plebiscite, plebiscite, plebiscite. What about the Kashmiri's view on plebiscite? And at this juncture, is it necessary, because you have been in India for more than 40, how many years? 47, 45 years. Okay. And plebiscite, agreeing plebiscite at this stage, is it meaningful?
The views of the people of Jammu and Kashmir on plebiscite are a mixed bag. You will find people in Kashmir Valley more inclined to be given this right than people in Jammu or Kargil and Ladakh. Now, is it relevant today? Well, it depends. I mean, it depends who you ask. If you were to ask me, I would say it's a settled matter that shouldn't be reopened. If you were to ask somebody, it's a fact. I mean, if you were to ask somebody, as I said earlier, there is a constituency of people in Jammu and Kashmir that do believe the solution to the problem lies outside of the four walls of the constitution. And therefore, if you were to ask them, of course, for them a plebiscite is meaningful and needs to be carried out. The fact is that I believe that if you were to open a political dialogue with the state of Jammu and Kashmir seeking to address some of the grievances of the people, this demand for plebiscite would be less and less relevant. But in the absence of such a dialogue, in the absence of any forward movement in the political arena, obviously this demand assumes greater importance and greater significance.
Yeah, thanks. So this is about, India being a soft state. No sovereign state in the world gets repeatedly attacked and invaded with impunity, with no response, with no muscular military response. This has happened to India. The parliament has got attacked and repeated attacks have happened, and the recent one in Pathankot is just an example. The question is that by India not responding, doesn't it perpetuate the view that it's a soft state and cannot respond at all?
I get your question. Can I answer your question with another question? What sort of response would you like?
A military response.
What sort of military response would you like?
There was a recent one in Bangladesh where India actually crossed the border to take out specific actors.
Do you know they did? Do you know whether we crossed the border? Because there are two views about that also.
Well, the official view is that they haven't, because that's the.
So you're advocating that we cross the border into Pakistan and take military action.
There are non-state actors in Pakistan who do this, right? That is the party line.
And what do we do about Pakistan's refusal to agree to a no first use on its nuclear weapons?
Yeah, so you're saying that...
So my extended argument to you is that let's assume we cross the border into Pakistan, we take out non-state actors, there is collateral damage there as well, and Pakistan decides to ratchet up the tension and unlock some of its nuclear arsenal. What should our response be then?
Yeah, we'll have to see if it
See,
comes
exactly. The problem is that, to my limited understanding, no two nuclear powers have ever fought a conventional war. And let's understand that any effort to cross the line of control or the border will result in a conventional war. Now, if you can guarantee me that this war between two nuclear powers will remain conventional, by all means. But please understand, you are very far removed from the battleground. It is not, I'm being very honest with you. The bombs and the missiles are not going to be flying over your homes. They're going to be flying over mine. So while you practice being a hard state, please do. But then can we reverse the geography and take you up there, bring me down here, and then we'll debate a hard response. I understand your frustration, and I'm sure there are leaders in Delhi who feel it as well. But believe me, given the possible fallout of what you're advocating, it's perhaps the wiser course to be a little less adventurous. And I mean this with no disrespect. The party that was advocating exactly what you advocated for 10 years in opposition has taken a completely different line now.
Yeah.
And 2 minutes? Okay, I have 2 minutes. So can I take this gentleman here and the gentleman who's already standing, and then I think we'll have to bring it.
If I may give you a hypothetical situation and a plebiscite was to take place.
You know, I never asked, can I just repeat what I said in an interview the other day? I never answer a hypothetical question with a categorical answer.
This might not be a hypothetical question, but actually be real. And if we do have a plebiscite in Kashmir, which direction do you think, in your wisdom, the votes will go?
You know, now this is not an answer, this is not a question that can be easily answered, because again, I'll come back to the point I made right in the beginning. What is the territorial jurisdiction of Jammu and Kashmir? Are you talking about a plebiscite only in the valley? Are you talking about a plebiscite only in what is Indian Jammu and Kashmir? Are you extending it to what they call Azad Kashmir, what we call POK? Or the state as it existed on the night of 14th, 15th August 47? You know, the answer will change depending upon the territory in which you conduct this plebiscite. So this is a conversation that you and I can have at a later stage. As I said, I don't give categorical answers to hypothetical questions. There was another gentleman, yeah.
Sir, we would like to know what has been the role of the Indian Army in maintaining and aligning to whatever is happening vis-a-vis the central government, and how is it being felt by the citizens of Kashmir? Do they see that Indian Army is supporting them or creating problems for them, which is making Kashmiris go against the government of India? And what would be your expectation as we move forward from the Indian government? Because I recently heard somebody talking about the Siachen challenge.
I get what you're saying. Nobody can suggest that the security forces, and I'm not just saying the army, I'm saying the paramilitary forces, J&K police, etc., have had a completely blameless record over the last 25 years. There have been incidents of human rights violations, whether by the state police, the central paramilitary forces, or the army. That having been said, I believe today the human rights record of the security forces is as good as it has ever been. Incidents of human rights violations are an exception and not the rule. But there is a deep sense of alienation among sections of the population that needs to be addressed. Now, I have, in a previous avatar, when I was in the opposition earlier, I have talked about the possibility of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Jammu and Kashmir, because there are far too many unanswered questions about particularly the last 25 years. But this Truth and Reconciliation Commission cannot come just from the Indian side of Jammu and Kashmir. It has to stretch across the line of control, and both India and Pakistan have to be equal partners in this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because we need to know, how did militancy start? What has happened to those youngsters who went across? I mean, if there are deaths in your schools and training establishments here, natural deaths, are you telling me that over 25 years of training in those ramshackle camps across the line of control, nobody will have died? So if there are disappearances, some of those disappearances may have happened on our side, but a lot of disappearances have probably happened on their side as well, which need to be answered. The exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits, what caused it? Because different people have different points of view on this. What can be done to bring them back? I think that's an important aspect that needs to be addressed. Because at the end of the day, Kashmir was proud of its Kashmiriyat. Kashmiriyat meant equal regard for all faiths and all religions. Our Islam is based on the Sufiana culture of the more tolerant version of Islam. So, I mean, that's part and parcel of who we are. So, yes, as I said earlier, there is in pockets, pretty large pockets, a sense of alienation because what people have seen over the last 20-25 years. But the fact is that the successes that we have had against militancy, the fact that militancy is at record low levels today, the fact that infiltration is much lower, is also down to the successes that the security forces have had. I think now the time has come that areas where militancy is a thing of the past, we need to gradually withdraw the army from contact with civilian population. We need to replace that army with paramilitary, with J&K police, so that the army can go back to doing what is originally tasked with, which is to protect the frontiers and leave the internal dimension to the security, the paramilitary and the police. That's it. It's a wrap. Okay. I'm sorry. I could have gone on and done this for much longer, but I've been told to wrap it up, so thank you all very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Omar Abdullah, for having taken time off his extremely pressing schedule to come and set the right tone for our conference, for the festival today. So very grateful for his kind presence and his illuminative conversation. Thank you.